Good morning, worst of all possible worlds! Brian here with you, and we got another episode ahead of us in this podcast of nightmares.
Right.
Ooh, I love this pod. Love it like you might love Goku just when it looks like he's about to pop if he eats another bite, but he can always take another bite.
Sure can.
Every new appearance by Josh on Trash Future means 100 new arrivals.
Hey.
But only half those gonks will survive Ong's hat, and that's if they can even tell us apart.
Wait, hold on. Survive Ong's hat?
Yeah, it's deadly. And why do these peeps come to Towawapu? Well, that's to be treated to bits by the tiniest country boy. And what is this, a leather bar? The bigger the swing, the bigger the bounty, kids. Or so they say, but you can only be a top-tier listener for so long. The faster you listen, the faster you burn out. That's not going to be good for our Patreon numbers. If you don't have your financial situation change first, Podcast Legends, you know where you'll find most of them? Other podcasts.
Hey.
Matters not where you come from, matters not if you're Dutch. What matters here is the what in the worst of all possible worlds, the podcast of nightmares.
So many possible worlds, but we got this one. So many possible worlds, but we got this one.
Welcome to the worst of all possible worlds, the first and only podcast that chooms on your BD till you flatline.
Come on,
I'm the worst of all
no.
possible AJs.
I'm the worst of all possible Brian.
And I'm the worst of all possible Joshes. It was really great hearing you laugh at all of your own jokes in the opening there, AJ.
Yeah, no, it was Brian's delivery. I liked it. I liked
that you turned the noun choom into a verb.
Yeah.
Remember?
I misused all of the
I'm
slang.
speed dialing Mike Pondsmith as we speak.
Oh, he's gonna be so mad.
Wait, does anybody else remember Choom Gang?
yes,
That Barack
I do remember
Obama,
Choom
was it in his
Gang.
yearbook, right? They were all said that they were part of the Choom Gang.
Wait a
Is
minute.
that what it is? I just always
were they
knew it as like some...
Cyberpunk fans?
No,
Is that why?
Barack Obama, if I recall correctly, in his high school yearbook, like his little quote or whatever was like shout outs to Choom Gang.
Was that was like a reference, or people played it as though it was a reference to the fact that he was smoking
Oh,
weed
it totally
or
was.
something?
They were all definitely
They were
smoking weed
chooming.
together. They were chooming.
Sure, they were
I guess,
chooming.
They were
yeah.
chooming in their choom cave.
Yeah.
Very. Welcome to the Choom Cave, everybody. It's our
Choom Game.
newest podcast. Our Choom Cave.
Sequel to Squid Game.
Our
Choom
Choom Game. Well, our Choom Game is strong today because we are here yet again for another case study in the pop culture of a dying empire.
Wow.
And today we are talking about a game that asks the question, what does that dying empire look like when taken to its most cartoonishly extreme version of itself? And also, what if you brought a katana to a gunfight? Yeah, we're finally talking about CD Projekt Red's 2020 action RPG, Cyberpunk 2077.
That is right. We are talking about Cyberpunk 2077 by CD Projekt Red.
So I was going to say
Yes.
Projekt, yeah.
Projekt Red, I'm sorry. Within the company, I
They-
did hear
yeah,
that they
they
do
do.
refer to it as CD Projekt Red, but yes, it is in Polish, it would be CD Projekt Red.
I
CD
personally,
CD Projekt.
I prefer a DVD project.
I'm from San Diego, actually, so
or
that's
a
fine.
Blu-ray project.
Oh, the
sure,
Blu-ray
sure.
project. Oh, yeah.
Well, CD Projekt Red is named such because they were founded when the CD-ROM became a viable format in Poland, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Poland was a little bit behind the times with the computer stuff. Once we get around to 1994, this is also sort of the widespread adoption of CD-ROM for a lot of games because you can store so much more information.
I played Myst. Yeah.
And in
Prequel to Riven?
It's the very same.
Also in 1994, that's when Poland got copyright laws
Oh.
that didn't exist in the socialist era. And so while they were liberalizing, then they got copyright laws. And so these two guys in Poland who were just copying shit on their own back in the floppy days where you could get relatively cheap floppy disks,
Oh, I love my floppy days.
suddenly had to do like
you-
legitimate
AJ,
business.
Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt the
Yeah.
flow. AJ, are you going to be like this the whole time?
Yes. These guys, what they ended up doing, instead of just getting games into Poland, were now getting involved in the process of localization.
Yeah.
And this is a big deal. So what CD Projekt did that was not normal was that they did the localization themselves and then handled distribution.
Wow,
right?
yeah.
Before a studio does, and now a studio does its own localization. When studios localize, they are typically hiring some kind of outside contractor.
Sure.
And if you go outside of the Western European languages, it becomes more expensive. And it becomes more expensive for an audience that's going to pay less money overall for your product. You can't sell Baldur's Gate for the same amount in Poland that you do in England, Canada, the US, Mexico, France, Spain, whatever.
Right.
And Baldur's Gate is where this started. They wrote a Polish translation of the game. They hired Polish actors to do the voice acted bits. Some of them, I guess, were relatively well-known actors.
Sure.
And they assumed all the risk themselves. And they went from selling, I don't know, 1,000 games, a couple thousand games with the stuff that they were bringing over to selling in the tens of thousands.
So at this time, the project was no longer floppy. It was quite firm.
That's right. Yeah.
Firm like a CD.
Firm and red. So once they get to the 2000s, they've done some localization. They've had some really big success selling things in Poland. And now they get into development. So they take a series of Polish novels.
Yes.
That we all know today that we probably haven't read. But
I mean, I've tossed a coin there a time or two.
that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Because it was The Witcher.
Yes.
These were very, very big 90s Polish fantasy novels. And there had been an attempt to make a video game of it before. There was a Polish movie. There was a Polish TV show that weren't very good. And this team of localizers then decided that they were going to publish their own game with a team of 20. That changed. What did they think this was? One light bulb?
Oh, God.
Probably.
See, here's the thing. I'm from CD Projekt Red, right? I'm listening to this podcast. I'm like, oh, I'm really jiving with this. Like, you know, they seem to be really talking us up. This is going so well. And then immediately into a light bulb joke. Immediately into a light bulb. We've lost Poland. We've lost fucking Poland.
Yeah, we have. What are you going to do? Call the Pope on us?
We'll get to a reason why that's very funny later.
Are you going to call your official king Jesus Christ, who according to the laws of Poland sits upon your throne? No, he doesn't. He's much higher than that.
Also, he's not the king of Poland. He's the king of the United States of America,
That's
God's chosen
right.
country.
No, look, as the Catholic in the room, I have to say that Jesus is entombed inside of the Pope's chair, which is called the Holy See. And you can't make a proclamation in the Catholic Church unless you're sitting on that seat of power.
Okay, I'm not a Catholic, but I don't think that's what Catholics believe.
That is, look it up.
That Jesus Christ is entombed in the chair?
I don't.
Yeah,
That's just not true.
I really like the
idea
idea that Catholics deny the resurrection entirely. They're like, no, yeah, the apostles took the body and they stuffed him in a
it's just
chair.
in that chair.
And we
why if you
sit on him now.
It's why if you ever walk into that chamber, you just hear a very muffled, help me.
Oh, so you don't deny the resurrection, you just deny the ascension. Yeah, because it's the worst of all possible worlds, and we do our theological jokes because that's who we are. Unfortunately, you're stuck with us.
Love that Lord.
Unless you choose to stop subscribing. Don't, please.
We need you so bad.
So in 2007, with a team of somewhere between like 80 and 100 people, they finally get The Witcher 1 released. And it does pretty well. Yeah. Like, it's not a super well-loved game. It's not a super successful game, but certainly by the standards of what CD Projekt had been doing before that point, huge change. Right. Like they go from this to being both a distributor and a developer. Of course, you have heard of their company that they use to sell games, GOG.
Right.
Yes.
Good old games. You might not know that that's CD Projekt, but that is them. And that's sort of the corner that they've been able to hold on this other part of the market where they sell old computer games, and they've navigated all sorts of very bizarre contract language.
Oh, yeah.
And
There's is it NoClip that did this amazing documentary, which we'll link in the show notes. Just it involves going to so many strange like holding companies and places that you would never imagine owning the IP for these things, and they negotiate and they're like, hey, would you like to make a little money? We'll cut you a deal. You know, you'll get royalties, and that's basically free money for you from this IP that you were otherwise sitting on. And now you get a return on your investment. And GOG is a really great service. It continues to be a great service.
it's been one of the best forces for video game preservation,
Yes.
honestly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Far more than Steam.
Yeah. So because of The Witcher and because of good old games, this has become a very big company. They're not yet publicly traded, but they're headed that way. By 2012, they released The Witcher 2, which is able to capitalize on the fact that, yeah, people did have some pretty positive memories of The Witcher 1. It sold okay. Witcher 2 is a massive success. There were a couple of high-profile critical reviews. I think One Up was one of them that were not super positive. But for the most part, this was like one of those game of the year type games. This went across the board, getting those 9s and those 10s and selling like millions and millions of copies.
Well, and something that CD Projekt is becoming known for at this point is the relative maturity of their storytelling.
Oh, yeah.
It's the idea of like, finally a game for adults, a role-playing game that truly allows you to play your role in whatever way you want and isn't willing to back away from more adult stuff, which in practice just means like tits and swears. But
sometimes there's just more of a frankness around sex. The first Witcher game, you could romance characters, and I think it was like a fade to black, and then you'd get like a little playing card that has their tits on it. Right. Not in the initial American release. That was kind of a thing, was that like the later special edition uncensored some of those things. But like Witcher 2 has sex scenes.
Right.
This is relatively novel, right?
Right.
Grand Theft Auto San Andreas had those. They weren't in the final game, but you could hack them in, and then that was very famously a problem for the industry.
Right. But Witcher 2 is fine.
Yeah. Yep. And that sort of paved the way for other games like Dragon Age and Baldur's Gate sequels and things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I think is very unique about those particular sex scenes is that they're not afraid to show bush.
Yeah.
Like there is pubic hair in all of them, and they're much more, I guess, free to show genitalia in a way that I think a lot of other games in the West certainly like shy away from.
Yeah. Including Cyberpunk. Outside of the opening menu. So
They start off strong.
yeah. So then 2015 rolls around. This is a pretty fast turnaround for games of this era.
Yeah.
Witcher 3 comes out, and it gets explosively good reviews.
Yeah.
It sells 1.5 million in pre-orders, and in 4 years sells 28 million copies as of now. They have sold 50 million
Holy.
copies of The Witcher 3.
Yeah.
Then, of course, there is a Netflix series. There is the spin-offs. We have Gwent.
Yeah.
And then Gwent expansions. People are really, really nuts for that Gwent stuff.
Yeah.
Gwent and its sequel, Gwent 2.
Gwentier.
But Witcher 3 is very buggy on release.
Yeah.
It kind of gets a pass for it even then because it plays so well. And GOG is known for doing some big overhaul patches for free.
Right.
But they also take all of their other people working on, say, maybe the other game that their studio is in pre-production for to work over on The Witcher 3 through the next year and change to make also like DLC and everything.
And the DLC for Witcher 3, I have to say, is it's so much better than the main game. Like they really it seems like this is a studio that really refines itself in the DLC, and it finds its games in the DLC.
I wonder if part of that is just veering a little bit away from the open world, you know?
Yeah, and
Like-
making it a little bit more streamlined a story.
Yeah.
I think there is some truth in that, and
Yeah.
it's certainly true for their next big project.
Yes. So their next big CD project, if you will.
I might.
In 2012, they announced that they are going to work on an adaptation of an old tabletop role-playing game.
Yes.
That is just called Cyberpunk.
Yes,
By
it is
Mike
a whole
Pondsmith.
genre
Yeah.
that has been adapted into a tabletop game, and it is made by a man named Mike Pondsmith, who is a nerd. I think is sort
Yeah.
of the best way to describe him. He is a nerd's nerd.
If you listen to our episode a month ago about Neuromancer, we explained that William Gibson was absolutely not a nerd. He was an old hippie who thought, wow, computers, that's fucking crazy, and thought about it in very political and thought about it in very psychedelic terms.
Mostly psychedelic, and that shows through in the writing of that book.
And but this book and this genre that's growing around the works of Gibson and other writers catches on with computer nerds.
Yeah.
And so this is the next generation. That was the early 80s. This is the late 80s that Mike Pondsmith is working on this game. And Pondsmith is not only a computer nerd, he is someone who has worked in the computer gaming world.
Yes, he has.
Making manuals and artwork and design
Oh.
for California Pacific. which was making computer games at this time. And then, he played a game of D&D and it changed his life.
Much like Warren Spector.
Yeah, absolutely.
And his first tabletop game was actually like based on mech anime. So he was also an 80s anime guy, which is a very rare breed
very
of man.
specific kind of nerd too. And it's also interesting that he moved into the world of tabletop. Mike Pondsmith is a black man, and the world of tabletop, has not been particularly welcoming to creators of color. It is very unique that he moves into the world and is immediately sort of as successful as he is once Cyberpunk is released. People flock to this thing and they love this game. As someone who has played a lot of D&D, I will say that it is very refreshing to have a game where there isn't bonuses based on race.
Yeah.
And a thing that Wizards of the Coast finally started getting rid of in let me see here, the year 2022. So it is not a world that is
but they're
very
mythical
accommodating.
races, AJ. There's definitely no parallels there to the real world that, they're drawing from J.R.R. Tolkien, who had no thoughts whatsoever
on race. Not a single one.
More like Grand Wizards of the Coast.
Oh, hey,
Jesus.
boy, we just lost that sponsorship.
So were you guys familiar with Cyberpunk, the tabletop game, really before CD Projekt and everything?
No, not at all.
Okay.
It was something that really was not on my radar. And it's something that if you ask a lot of tabletop players, it's not a particularly preferred method of play.
Yeah. I've been talking about that with a couple of friends of mine who do this stuff. And they're like, the interlock system is a little But what's interesting is I had heard of it. I don't play tabletop games. I didn't have friends who played tabletop games. I didn't have friends growing up. And so this is kind of the third string, because the first string is just D&D, right? It just eclipses everything else in terms of success and market share.
Yeah.
Then you have Shadowrun, Call of Cthulhu, Star Wars, the role-playing game.
Yep.
Sure.
And then you have the next tier, which is stuff like because I had heard of it. It did have enough of a presence that it somehow reached me. But it doesn't. The fans that it does have, I will say, having spent time online reading the forums, fucking love it.
Oh, they love
and
it
they
so
really
much.
love the story, and they love the characters that have existed throughout the many years that these games have encapsulated.
Well, there's something interesting about trying to systematize sort of a cyberpunk world into a role-playing game, right?
Yeah. Right.
Because there are all of these different thematic elements that have come in from these different pieces of media, right?
Yeah.
Whether you're talking about something like Neuromancer or Blade Runner or Philip K. Dick, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, like all of that, right?
Yeah, Hardwired, the Walter John Williams novel, was like the main inspiration for Cyberpunk.
Sure.
It's funny, Pondsmith had not read Neuromancer until long after creating Cyberpunk.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which is very interesting, because clearly 2077 is drawing from Neuromancer in a
Right.
very, very explicit way.
But I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is just that, like, it's one thing to have these stories and these aesthetics. It's another thing entirely to take that and turn it into an actual systematized method of gameplay.
Yes.
And as we get into talking more about 2077, I'll be interested to talk about the ways that those mechanics work. Now, is Cyberpunk 2077 based mechanically on the mechanics of the Cyberpunk RPG in any meaningful way?
No,
Okay.
not really.
Well, in terms of character customization, there is stuff in there, like the way that you add implants into your body. That is 100% from the game
But
itself.
the implant aspect of Cyberpunk, the tabletop game, is also linked to a sort of humanity metric, where you go more insane the more implants you have.
you get
until
more
you reach-
cyberpsychosis as you go along.
yeah, and
that's,
so-
that's kind of like in Prey with the when you get more Typhon powers, the less and less
Yeah.
human you appear.
And in Cyberpunk, if you go fully cyber psycho, you become an NPC. It's like you've died, but the game master takes over your character, who
cool.
can then show up as a cyber psycho. And then you have to, make a new character. There's also rolling for like backstory, which I think is interesting.
Well, you can do that in D&D as well. Like you can you
okay.
can roll if you want. If you don't want to like come up with a whole backstory for yourself, they have like
So there's stuff where you develop relationships and stuff like that. And then that can be like, this person comes to you with a mission. It's your ex-girlfriend or whatever.
Yeah.
I was talking to a friend who's played this game. He said the central mechanic of Cyberpunk 2020 is debt.
Yeah.
You are always on the hook for something. If you have implants, you have to buy your medications. You have to maintain them. You have to pay for your internet. You have to pay for your rent. There's all this money that has to keep moving.
Yeah.
So you have to keep doing more and more extreme things. Right. Another way I heard it described by someone on a forum is that D&D is about unlikely people all coming together and becoming grand heroes, and Cyberpunk 2020 is about super competent professionals barely scraping by.
So many possible
Hey there, you are listening to a preview of a premium episode of The Worst of All Possible Worlds. If you'd like to listen to the rest of this, head on over to our Patreon. That's patreon.com/worstofall. And you can listen to not only the rest of this episode, but our entire backlog of premium episodes, bonus episodes, and if you subscribe at the $10 tier, you will get an extra episode of the podcast every single month. Again, that is patreon.com/worstofall. Hope to see you there.